Hello and welcome to My Living Room. I'm Kathleen Hershner. We're early in the season here with filming this show, and so I'm making an effort to invite people to be on the show with me that I'm comfortable with and that I can have normal conversations in English with, and also people that I like and want to get to know better. That's no exception today because my guest is a person that I work with, but I don't know very well. We're both from California, we're both from the San Francisco Bay Area, and we're both Americans. So this is the All-American episode of My Living Room. So I'd like to welcome my friend and colleague, Justin Peterson, to My Living Room.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Are you comfortable?
I'm comfortable.
Do you think...
That's a nice, cozy living room environment here.
It's very cozy. It's very homey. And we're both from San Francisco. So when I first met you in the halls of our company, somebody had said to me, have you met that other guy from San Francisco? And I'm like, who? I didn't know there was another guy here. And I met you, and you do have kind of an all-American look, wouldn't you say?
Well, yes. The stereotype is if you have blonde hair, right?
And blue eyes.
Yeah, then you're from California.
And you're tall, and you're kind of, you know...
Yeah, I don't know where that comes. It probably comes from the whole surfing culture
California.
And the image. Which is true. A lot of people end up, if you are at the beach all day in Los Angeles, you end up with blonde hair, even if you don't.
Even if it's my color.
Even if you don't have blonde hair. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't make sense to have this all-American stereotype because it's a nation of immigrants.
Absolutely.
My ancestors are all from Ireland, and I look Irish more than whatever all-American is. Your ancestors are Swedish.
Yes.
And you look very typically Swedish to me.
Yeah, in fact, my grandparents were first-generation Americans. My mother's father was born in Sweden, and my mother's mother was born in Germany, which is pretty common in the United States, and especially in California, nobody is from California.
No, that's one of our jokes that we talk about a lot is that I'm not from California, but when people ask me where I'm from, I say, oh, I'm from San Francisco, because it's a lot more interesting than saying,
glamorous.
I'm from Topeka, Kansas.
Nah,
But
I think you should be proud of your Midwestern origins.
I am proud of being Midwestern, but it sounds so much more interesting to say San Francisco, and also people know in Spain where San Francisco is.
Right, if you say Topeka, Kansas, they'll say, okay.
¿Cómo?
And that's it.
¿Dónde?
But if you say San Francisco, they'll probably say, I know someone there, or I've been there, or I love it, or I was in California.
But not very many people who live in California now are actually native Californians.
No.
I only know a few people from San Francisco who are actually from the city.
Very rare.
Yeah.
Very rare. You have to remember that California was incorporated as a state in 1850. And the first people got out there, I don't know, maybe 1820s or the 1830s. So imagine a state now with over 30 million people.
Yeah.
That's as big as many countries. But it's only 150, between 150, less than 200 years old. So.
Well, and the immigration pattern I would assume Spanish people might know this, that the immigration started in the East, and it took many, many years to work for the pioneers to work their way west. We had Native American tribes who didn't particularly appreciate that. Also, the land, part of the Midwest was owned by France. The Louisiana Purchase was when we bought it from France. And then, of course, California was owned by Spain or Mexico. I don't remember.
Ceded. That entire territory ceded to the United States after the Mexican War.
Which is kind of an interesting way of saying handed over, or not really given to, but sort of...
Relinquished.
Relinquished.
Sacrificed.
That's a good expression for it. But so it was one of the last states to be settled. It's my favorite place, and if I ever went back to the United States to live, I'm sure that I would live in San Francisco.
It's funny. My wife makes fun of me because I grew up in California. I love it when I go back there, but I spent a long time in the South of the United States. In 4 years in Virginia for college, and then about 8 years in North Carolina for graduate school, and where I had my first teaching job. So I'm kind of, I was born and raised and grew up in California, but much of my adult life I spent in the South. So when I get homesick for the United States, sometimes I get homesick for Virginia and North Carolina and not California. And sometimes when we think about moving to California or moving to the United States someday, I normally say, you know, I'd rather move to Virginia or Carolina. And people say, why do you want to move back to the United States and not move back to the state that you grew up in? But
well, your wife is Spanish.
Yes.
And you've lived in Spain for a long time.
Yes.
How many years?
Only about 5 years.
Well, not a long time, but a reasonable amount of time. And your wife may think that it would be unnatural for a person not to want to go back to their homeland,
But that's
their
the
home
way,
state.
I think that's a big cultural difference.
Yeah.
An interesting thing to think about. When people ask me, isn't it strange to live in Spain? It's such a different culture. How do you get used to it? And
Spanish people ask you this.
yeah, well, Spanish people and American people are surprised that I live in Spain, which was it's not a logical move, or it wasn't a logical move for me, because obviously I have no Spanish roots or a Spanish family.
It's clear. It's clear that Justin's a Swede.
My ancestry is Swedish and German, but I ended up, I was teaching Spanish at the University of Salamanca for an American university, in fact, a university based in North Carolina, and I had a teaching assignment there for a year, and that's when I met my wife, and I moved to Spain.
You met your wife in Salamanca.
I met my wife
when
in
you had a little
Salamanca,
teaching
even though
assignment.
she is from Madrid.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Salamanca's a great little city.
It's I would stress little. No, it is a great place. I love Salamanca. It's a beautiful town, but I think it's a good town if you're not used to small towns like that. It's a good town to visit for a weekend or for a week.
But maybe not for an entire semester.
But for a semester or a year, I was there for a year, it can get quite small.
What do we do tonight?
That's right.
What
we can take another walk through the beautiful historic center, which is comprised of 4 or 5 beautiful streets, but I prefer Madrid.
Well, getting back to something that you just mentioned, people do ask, Spanish and our family at home in the United States ask us about the experience living here. And Spanish people will say, well, don't you miss the United States? Why do you want to be here? I heard this a lot when I lived in Chile. The Chileans would always say, why are you in Chile? And I said, because I want to get to know your country. Yeah. But my family have said some very unusual things to me, and things that I could become offended with if I didn't know them better. My dad said, well, I just don't know why anybody would want to live outside of the United States. And this is, of course, from his generation, where growing up in the United States in the 1950s, where it was the land of, it was prosperous, the land of opportunity. And I said to him, Dad, I mean, how many American citizens, how many people from the U.S. have a chance to live in another country? It's something I didn't want to pass up. And now I'm like you, I'm becoming very comfortable with my lifestyle here.
Yeah, I think you have the two extremes, don't you, in the United States? You have that stereotype of closed Americans who are very proud of being American.
Like my dad.
Like your father. And they don't want to leave. They're not very interested in traveling.
They can't understand why you would want to live in anywhere other than the land of opportunity.
Right. Now, did your father grow up in the Midwest?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, probably
yes,
not
in
coincidentally,
Iowa.
my father grew up in the Midwest as well, in Iowa, in part, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, and Texas. And probably in the center of the country, maybe that the mentality is a little bit more closed.
Well, they aren't, people in the Midwest where I grew up aren't exposed, or at least 40 years ago.
Yeah.
They weren't as exposed to the different cultural changes that were going on both sides, on the Atlantic and on the Pacific. Yeah. And they didn't grow up with people from other cultures. The most extreme example of cultural diversity in Topeka was the Mexican community, which really, I mean, it was more like people were speaking Spanglish and whatnot. But no, it's true that Midwesterners at that time did have a much more narrow view.
Absolutely, especially if they're from small towns.
Yes.
I mean, that's another world out there, another culture. I mean, because within the United States, we have many different cultures. San Francisco in the 1980s, or the San Francisco Bay Area in the 80s, where I grew up, and where you spent a lot of time in the Bay Area, and Iowa in the 50s.
Totally different places.
Two different countries.
You had your beat generation, your beat writers, the Summer of Love, the hippie movement, everything that we that we from California are familiar with, and then none of that was happening
Right.
in the Midwest.
Well,
the worst thing you could do when I was growing up was drink beer. That was I mean, if your parents caught you downing a cerveza, oh,
Can you imagine that in Spain today?
No.
You're grounded. You can't go out for
I don't want
3
you
months because you drank one beer.
I don't want you going out drinking any beer. And if you ever smoke that marijuana, don't come home. I mean, this was serious business.
My father grew up in a small town. His father was a preacher.
Really?
Was a Lutheran minister. So you
Because
can
all Swedes are Lutherans, aren't
well,
they? Pretty much.
Yes, the Swedish communities there in the center of the United States were very Lutheran and influenced by the Lutheran Church.
And this grandfather was an actual minister in the Lutheran Church?
Yes, he was
preacher?
a minister in the Lutheran Church, and so you can imagine he grew up in this very small town, conservative atmosphere, and he had not met a Jew or a black person until he went to Chicago.
As an adult?
As an adult, yeah, until he went to college, actually.
incredible.
I think he went to Chicago when he was, after high school or something like that. He went to the big city, and he had not been out of that small town environment until
Must have
then.
been a shock for him.
Yeah, that's like going to a new country.
Well, it's a good thing he didn't go to the San Francisco area
That would have
about
been
that time.
That would have been too much. Chicago was enough.
A bit different than racial differences there, but that's one of the things that I miss about San Francisco. I mean, I don't miss too many things on a regular basis, but I do miss some of the freedom to be attitude. Like, whoever you are, whatever you're dressed like, whatever your sexual orientation, whatever your religion or your politics, we will tolerate you.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think
It has a reputation for being a very liberal, very welcoming, very tolerant city.
Yeah. But there is a conservative faction in the Bay Area, especially, it seems to be in relation to how much money you have.
That's probably,
the more money
true.
you make.
How conservative California is, because California traditionally votes Democrat,
Right.
and the Bay Area is a Democratic stronghold and kind of the capital of the hippie revolution in the 60s.
The left wing.
But I think still, that said, it is blown out of proportion because even though it is liberal and strongly Democratic, probably maybe 40% or something like that of people vote Republican and are more
Especially in the
conservative.
South. In Orange County, which is near Los Angeles, is
So,
one of the big...
the numbers are not that lopsided, even though the Democrats traditionally win the elections.
Well, it just goes to show that stereotypes are only loosely based in truth. There's some relevance to them, I suppose, but...
Well, speaking a little bit about American politics, that's relevant to what happened in the famous election with Gore. Probably some Spaniards don't understand the American system. A lot of Americans don't understand,
We don't understand
the American presidential system.
What do they call it? The Electoral College?
The Electoral College, which is a relic from the 18th century, from the original Constitution of the United States, which hasn't been amended in that department. It is a winner-takes-all system. So if you are going to lose California by 2%, if you lose California by 2%, you receive 0 electoral votes from California.
So in other words, even if you lose by the number of people who vote for you, if you're missing 2%, you could lose the entire state.
No, if you lose
If
you lose by any number of votes, if you lose by 1%, you receive no electoral votes.
So you lose the state.
You lose the entire state. So it is very deceiving because you see the map of the United States with the famous election there when
Or they light up the different states.
with Bush and Gore. Yeah, and you see, for
Red or
example,
blue.
the famous red states, which are the Republican states in the South, and you think, oh my God, there is not one Democrat in the entire South.
State of Kansas.
That's not true. If you lose the state, you lose all the electoral votes.
Well, hasn't there been a lot of debate in the last 20 years, especially after our recent election with Gore and Bush?
Yes.
There's been a lot of debate about changing this system because, as you said, it's antiquated. It's a relic. It's from our original Constitution drafted in 1776.
Yes.
Verse 5.
Apparently there are some other countries, I was chatting with someone about this, there are some other systems where this can happen that are anti-democratic in the sense that you can have fewer votes and win the election, as happened with George Bush.
Yeah.
But they always talk about changing it, and they never do it.
Well, they talk about changing the jury system, the system of a juried trial.
Yeah.
They've talked about that and how it's the best of a bad situation. I mean,
Right.
I've heard lawyers say, well, you know, it's the best we have.
Right.
It's like, really? Then, I mean, with all the creative thinkers that we have in the world, we can't come up with something a little better?
Yeah, when I talk with friends and people here in Spain about the political systems and the legal systems, that's one thing that I always criticize about the United States is I don't like the jury system.
No.
And I
It's
admire
flawed.
I admire the systems here, which are prevalent in Spain, which generally, although there are some provisions for juries, I believe, under Spanish law, I could double check that. Sometimes there are juries, but they're very limited. In general,
On a case-by-case basis,
yeah, I
maybe.
don't know how it works. A lawyer could explain it. But in general, I prefer the Spanish system,
Really?
in which you have judges generally are in charge, or judges or panels of judges.
Well, I like the idea of a group of judges.
Yes.
That would be like our Supreme Court, but on a lower, a more
Because
regional level.
if you have only one judge, obviously that opens the door to potential corruption and
Prejudice,
But a
bias.
system with multiple judges, I think, would be ideal. The jury system, as we saw, in the 80s and the 90s, with those high-profile cases.
12 Angry Men.
The O.J. Simpson case, which unfortunately reached the world press, right?
Embarrassing.
And the Rodney King case.
Embarrassing.
And a lot of other high-profile cases. I think they've highlighted the flaws in the system.
Well, you bring up an interesting topic that we decided we were going to talk about, and that is to talk about things that we don't like about our own country.
Yeah.
I've mentioned to you before, in fact, you helped me out with this on the radio program, Women on the Rise. I've had a lot of email, some people call it fan mail, I prefer to call it correspondence, where people write in and they say, we like listening to your show. We would like for you to talk more about the things you don't like about Spain.
Well, that was so dangerous advice you received.
It was a dangerous invitation, but I received more than one of these emails, and they said, we really enjoy it when you talk about the things you don't like, because sometimes I criticize the metro or I criticize some other minor thing. But unfortunately, one day I went a little too far, and I took this advice to heart, and I kind of let some of my feelings be known, and I got my first hate mail from a woman, and I told you about this. And basically she said, you know, if you don't like this country, why don't you leave?
That's funny. It sounds like exactly what a lot of conservatives say when minority groups or immigrant groups in the United States complain about treatment. They say, well, why don't you get out?
Well, if you don't like it, go ahead and leave. And so this was the essence. It was written in Spanish. I had to have you, I think, help me translate it.
Yeah.
But she was quite angry. And I understood that.
Yeah.
So then I decided to have, okay, fair representation, equal representation. I'll have a show. Since you think all I ever do is talk about the things I like about the United States, I'll have a show about the things I don't like. For instance, you and I were talking about the juried system, or some of the other, the electoral system.
Yeah.
And you helped me with this.
I sent you a message summarizing the things that, when I think about the United States, the things I definitely don't like. And some of those things were, well, one thing, for example, I live in the center of Madrid and I don't have a car. My wife doesn't have a car.
Yeah.
We are a carless
and
household.
you're about to be a father in 2 weeks.
But we're not in any hurry. We're not in any rush to get a car. Now, this, in the United States, especially if you live in the suburbs and not in Manhattan or the center of Chicago or so,
you have to have a car.
It's unthinkable. It is a totally car-dependent automotive society. And that's one thing that I really like about living in the center of Madrid.
Most of my American friends like you who have moved to Madrid, that's one of the first things they say.
It's one of the first things that really changes your lifestyle, because if you live in the suburbs of the United States, you are used to getting in your car every single day. And it's not just that. Driving to work, okay, many people here in Madrid drive to work, but it's driving everywhere. When I lived in North Carolina, you could not buy a bottle of milk
without getting in your car.
Without getting in your car.
Do you think that maybe American people in particular appreciate the ease of getting around in Spain more than other European immigrants?
Yeah.
Like if you lived in Germany and came to Madrid, Big deal.
That's a good example.
You live in Amsterdam, come to Madrid, no big deal. But for an American, I'm serious, when you come to a town like Madrid or even Barcelona or a city where there's an infrastructure for transportation,
right.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
You mean I don't have to get in my car to
ever?
I can live in this city and not own a car, have the expense of a car, pay for gasoline.
Yeah. And it's funny,
It's
I think the
incredible.
American car companies have convinced Americans for generations that having 2 cars is the best thing that can happen to you, and it gives you a wonderful lifestyle, which is actually probably not true, and people don't realize how expensive it is.
I had a car payment that was $600 a month, and the only reason I could afford it when I was in sales was because my company was paying me $400 a month.
They were helping you with the car.
They were helping to subsidize the use of the car.
Not just the car. You have the car payment, you have gasoline, you have repairs, and you have insurance.
Exactly.
So, living in downtown Madrid obviously is extremely expensive, but we save some money, we save a lot of money on transportation.
Definitely. It's one of the things that I personally like the most. And so, yes, I criticize that.
It's funny, people here complain a lot about the buses and the metro, ironically, which are precisely the things that I think are incredibly advanced, incredibly efficient, and very convenient. You cannot grab a bus every 5 minutes in the center of every American city.
Certainly not in San Francisco.
Or not San Francisco. The bus system is infamous.
One bus per hour on certain routes.
That's right.
And there are buses that leave to go to the city. We both lived in Marin County. That Marin County is everything north of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Right.
Up until you get to like Petaluma.
North of the city of San Francisco and south of the famous wine country. So
exactly.
Many foreigners know about the wine
Napa
country
Valley.
and they know about San Francisco, so it's right in between.
And there are buses that go to the city. There are express buses, but they only go for 1 hour. So if you don't need to be at work at 8 o'clock.
The problem is if you don't work in a very important location, for example, the financial district in the city down by the famous Transamerica Pyramid and the skyscrapers, if you don't work down there, if you work on the outskirts of town or in the suburbs or in an area that is not really central, you're out of luck. You can't take the bus because it only goes to a few locations. Here in Madrid,
it's a conspiracy.
In Madrid, the bus system is excellent. You can get almost anywhere in the center, and then of course the metro is phenomenal compared to most subway systems.
So see there, we do like something very much about Madrid. We give it 2 thumbs up.
Two thumbs up for public transport in Madrid.
Another thing that I like about Madrid, and I don't know if this was on your list, I think you entitled your email Things That Suck About America.
Yeah, that's right. That's not exactly the most formal English.
It's colloquial English, meaning things we don't like or things that are bad about the United States. I don't know if this was on your list. It was on mine, because while you were doing your list, I had mine.
You're doing your own, and some things coincided.
Some things coincided. I had my own, you had your own. But one of the things that I liked about living here is that you can have a glass of wine at lunch without someone looking at you like, ooh, we're starting a little early today,
starting a little
aren't
bit
we?
early.
And when my parents came over, they were horrified. They're like, well, you're drinking at lunch now? I'm like, well, yeah, because you have a glass of wine
the great
with
thing
your
is,
lunch.
in Spain, you can start drinking beer at least at 10 in the morning.
Exactly.
I think it's wonderful.
But the United States is such a prudish, limited country in so many ways.
It's true. We have a very strong puritanical tradition.
From our ancestors.
Absolutely. And remember that the country was founded by Puritan immigrants who wanted to found this very godly society.
Strongly Catholic immigrants, Italians, Irish. Then you had your conservatives, your Swedes, Germans.
We tried to prohibit alcohol in the 1920s. Can you imagine prohibition in France or Spain? It's unthinkable.
Well, I certainly haven't been practicing temperance or prohibition, but I can say that that's one of the things that I really appreciate about living in Spain. And when I go back to the United States, I feel a little uncomfortable, especially smoking cigarettes is a completely other topic,
too. Especially in California.
Yeah. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the things that suck about America and the things that we love about Madrid. So stay tuned for more of my conversation with my friend and compatriot, Justin Peterson. We'll be right back after a short break.